Good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to KIX EMAP Hub's Webinar 18 on Transforming Education Through Technology in Southeast Asia. My name is Anaka Harish Ganesh, and I'm the Project Officer for the Southeast Asia sub-region of the KIX EMAP Hub. I'm here to just give a quick technical introduction, after which I'll hand over the floor to our knowledge lead, Amy Crompton. So firstly, due to the large room size, microphones are switched off, but please do keep your camera switched on if possible, as it is friendlier. We are recording this event and the recordings will be made publicly available. Please rename yourself in the participants window with your first name, last name, and your country, and introduce yourself using the chat function. In case of any problems, please feel free to write to us using the chat function as well. We have dedicated Q&A sessions during this webinar. Please feel free to ask your questions at any time using the chat function, and we'll group them together and address them during the Q&A sessions. And when you do ask your questions, please make sure to mention your first name, last name, and your country. Please follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter or X at KIX EMAP. And if you are, mentioning this webinar on your social media platforms, please use the hashtags KIX EMAP and GPEKIX. Now I'll hand over the floor to the KIX EMAP Knowledge Lead for Southeast Asia, Amy Crompton. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Transforming Education Through Technology in Southeast Asia. We're happy to see so many familiar faces and some new faces. I'm Amy Crompton, Knowledge Lead for the KIX EMAP Hub, and I'm joined today by a few of my colleagues, Arushi Tirway, Anaka Harish Ganesh, and Allison Vess, who will be providing technical and moderation support. Today's event has been organized by the KIX EMAP Hub. So our hub is part of the KIX Knowledge and Innovation Exchange Program, which is a global partnership for education GPE mechanism developed and implemented in collaboration with the International Development Research Center, IDRC, based in Canada. KIX provides opportunities for applied research, knowledge sharing, and knowledge exchange on education priorities set by GPE partner countries. Our KIX EMAP Hub, which is hosted by NORAD, the Global Center Education Center in Geneva, works with 36 countries in Europe, Middle East and North Africa, Asia and Pacific, hence the EMAP acronym. Our mission is to surface, amplify, and use research evidence for policy and planning in the EMAP region countries. Today's webinar topic resulted from the analysis of our baseline study for the Southeast Asian subregion that we conducted late last year. These results highlighted technology and digitalization of education as the most in-demand topic according to survey respondents. So those respondents are in large part all of you in attendance, policymakers, researchers, education practitioners, and more. So this webinar aims to support knowledge exchange related to the demands, challenges, and opportunities that technology presents to teachers, administrators, and education policymakers. So throughout this event, there will be numerous opportunities to raise your own questions, comments, and share your own experiences. Let me quickly go through the agenda with you. We'll begin with an overview from a guest speaker, Evans Attis from GPE. Then we'll dive into our three main presentations. Between each of our presentations, we'll have time for questions and discussion. So we welcome you to add your questions and comments in the chat at any time. It is now my great pleasure to introduce today's webinar speakers. Evans Attis, Education Economist and Data and Evidence Lead. Antonia Mandry, Education Specialist at UNICEF and East Asia and Pacific Regional Office. Anna Dabrowski, Senior Research Fellow at the Australian Council for Education Research. Yung Nichka, Research Fellow also at ACER. And Nho Thuy Anh Tuet, Digital Education Officer at UNICEF Vietnam. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here today to share your work and experiences with us. Evans, I'll hand it over to you to begin with the overview of GP's work topic. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you in this webinar, and I'm very sure it's going to be an enriching conversation. As Annie just said, my name is Evan Satis, and I work at GPE as the lead on data and evidence. I don't know if my presentation is up yet, but I would like to start by saying that GPE is very new in this area, I would say, because we know it's a crowded space. But at the same time, if someone asks why we are interested engaged in technology for education, we all know what's happening today is that as it was said during the World Education Forum, where they said there is a crisis, a need for, can we move to the next slide, please? There's a crisis around reskilling, basically. So there is a major needs for reskilling across the world because we are living in a digital world. And we have some statistics that say that nearly 1 billion jobs worldwide will have to undergo some significant changes due to technology in the next decade. So this really questions the relevance of education and also how we can leverage technology to improve education performance, and also how education can contribute to really equip the young people of today to really thrive in this digital world. And the second thing is that we know during the past pandemic, it has really accelerated the use and the need for EdTech. And also it showed that the challenges that we had in low resource settings actually to deploy technology, making sure that everyone has access to technology. And we know that the development of technologies, whether it's emerging technology or the traditional ones, it will go fast, it will spread fast. So we just need to be prepared. And the third part is that GPE has been receiving a lot of requests from partner countries to support, especially that we are promoting the transformation of education systems. The question is how technology can enable this system transformation. And when we look into our portfolio, we have been investing in technology for some years now. We realize that countries are already putting a lot of resources into technology for education. So basically, these elements really pushed us to really think through what we should do, how we can make technology work for education. Next slide, please. So based on that, what is really the current state of affairs? We all know that we are facing a learning crisis, and we know that 7 out of 10 children, they cannot read properly. And we know there is a high number of children who are out of schools. And we also know that education systems are faced with a lot of crises, and which really test their level of resilience. And the other aspect is the fact that the way education is managed, it's managed in a lot of countries, it's done in an inefficient manner. And we also know countries are investing a lot in technology, but we are not seeing the results in terms of how technology is improving learning outcomes. So basically what happened, a lot of countries are going for the quick wins. They buy a lot of devices, they invest in connectivity, but as I said before, we're not seeing a lot of changes. So we are wondering what's happening. Is it the hardware, or is it more the software that we should focus on? Next slides, please. So we said, okay, how can we make technology work for education? Let's go back to the basics. Let's look at the education goals that we think technology could support, and whether there is evidence for that, and when there is a gap, how we can fill that gap. So we look into how technology could support equitable and inclusive access to digital and teaching and learning content, how we can really integrate effective pedagogical approaches to teaching and learning material, and also how technology could support really the provision of skills for young people to be able to thrive in the labor market currently and also in the future. And the fourth one is how we can leverage technology to improve the efficient management of education systems. Also, how we can support planning, how we can support monitoring using technology. And the last one, we just said it, that the education systems are interrupted by crisis. How technology can really help build system resilience. So these are really the 5 areas where we are now reflecting on, trying to see how technology can really help education achieve those goals. Next slide, please. So we understand technology, it has a lot of opportunities, but also we know there are a lot of risks associated to the use of technology. So this is why we have been thinking about key principles that we should adopt to make sure that we mitigate those risks. We know that there are a lot of products out there to support learning, to support management. So we say to ourselves, the first thing, it has to be driven by evidence. We need to make sure that we give ourselves enough possibility to test solutions, but we need to be able to leverage, mobilize evidence to make sure that we only invest at scale on products that can work. The second thing is that we need to make sure that the solutions, the digital solutions that we are adopting, they are led by the country context, and making sure that those products are really contributing to the relevance of education. The third principle, it's about how the investments we are making are is sustainable and also scalable and cost effective, because we know some countries, they have invested a lot, they are not seeing results. So we know sometimes they start some investments, they have to stop because it's not sustainable. And the fourth one is the one I mentioned earlier around equity and inclusion. The solutions that are designed, they have to be designed for all children. Basically, whether you are a child in a remote area, whether you have some level of disabilities, you need to be able to have access to this kind of technologies that will help you learn and thrive. And the last point, which is very important, is about protecting children and young people from the harm that technology can cause sometimes. So this is why we have a principle of do no harm when we are supporting countries in adopting new technology. Next slide, please. So based on the principles we have, so we are trying to build on the Digital Transformation Collaborative, which is a platform that exists at global level to support countries in adopting technology. So we have what we call the 6 C's, where we have different pillars that are very important for us when we are talking about digital transformation. The first one, it's about coordination and leadership, making sure that the countries, they have clear vision, they have evidence, and they have the capacity to really lead the process of transforming education using technology. The second aspect is that they have to have clear processes to reinforce efficient education management before they even automate or digitize, for example, the collection of data, accountability system within the education. And the third one is about having the relevant content and also pedagogical alignment. It's not a matter of automate content, but we need to make sure the right pedagogies are also automated for teachers to be supported and students to learn. And the fourth one is about building capacity and also having a clear change management strategy to make sure that once the technology is developed and is adopted and used at all levels. And of course, I mentioned earlier the issue around cost and sustainability. So it's a matter of trying to see how we can leverage resources and also adding new resources to make sure that technology is leveraged properly. And the last one, it's very important, which is about connectivity and infrastructure. So these are the 6 pillars that we want to work around when we are supporting digital transformation at country level. Next slide, please. So concretely, how are we supporting our partner countries? So we have 3 entry points, but the first one, within the first entry point, we have 2 levels. We have the level where how we support countries to adopt digital learning solutions to improve learning outcome and success, and also how we can support countries to leverage technology to improve the effectiveness of the system for planning, for monitoring, for management. And the second entry point is about once we implement those initiatives to support country capacities, whether we can identify models that can be scaled up, and based on those models, how we can leverage innovative financing to support implementation. And the last one, from those models, what are we learning and how other countries can learn from those models, and to make sure that they also start the process of transforming their system using digital transformation. I think this is the last slide. It was a pleasure to share with you GP's ideas around technology for education. I would be happy to respond to questions or comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Evans. I think you really framed today's webinar very well. I think that some of the presenters are going to touch on some of the key dimensions of the 6 C's that you presented, along with some of the objectives and some of the issues that come out of that. So thank you so much for joining us. And if you're willing to answer questions in the chat and throughout the night, that way, or throughout the day, that would be great, the webinar. I think we'll move on to our next presenter, Antonia Mandry from UNICEF. We'll be presenting on teachers' digital literacy in the East Asia and Pacific region. So Antonia, over to you.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me, Amy, and all colleagues. I just want to check, Annika, you have, yes, showing my presentation. Thank you so much. My name is Antonia Mandry. I work with UNICEF East Asia Pacific Regional Office. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a study that's about to come out. So you're getting a sneak peek. It hasn't been published yet. That was done for us by a consultant, Dr. Rhonda Lesney Green. She could not be here today with you. I am actually presenting on her work. We actually commissioned this study, and it's a little literacy study that's looking specifically at 5 countries in our region: Cambodia, China, Laos, Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu, mainly because it became a companion piece to 2 studies that came out last year. So last year, UNICEF at the HQ at the global level actually came out with a gender digital divide study, based on very robust data. I encourage everyone to Google UNICEF gender digital divide, and you'll see all the very, very rich data. And then the second one was a regional study that we did that was looking at girls' digital literacy. And some of the findings there were very, very interesting. When you look at the global data and at the very macro level, our region actually looks really good in terms of gender digital divide, with very small differences in gender parity in terms of the development of digital skills and literacy, and sometimes even in favor of girls. And we thought our girls' digital literacy study, which zoomed in a little bit closer, actually threw a little light on some of that data, and actually showed some really interesting variety. And so before I go into the teachers' digital literacy, I'm going to pull out a few of the findings from the previous studies to kind of set the scene for you. And that's why we're still on the first slide of my presentation. So basically, some of the findings from the girls' digital literacy study last year was actually that until adolescence, girls and boys actually develop skills approximately in the same way and at the same rate. Once adolescence hits, that changes. And basically what happens is boys continue to develop more advanced digital competencies, and they tend to use it, they engage with online spaces with those advanced competencies, whereas girls tend to plateau in their digital skills development and function in online spaces in very specific ways, like shopping and communication. I do encourage everyone to take a look at that study for more detail, because I'm simplifying a little bit. Some of the other things that came out was that girls and boys and adolescents in general tend to learn better from peers or through self-learning, and that's how they develop their digital skills, and not really from their teachers and their parents. It is also an area where parents are, shall we say, gatekeeping girls' access to online spaces, but they're not gatekeeping boys. And that is both, that has several unintended consequences. Girls, therefore, are limited in their ability to develop their skills, but also boys then are actually exposed to more online risks because the parents perceive that those risks do not exist for boys. And then finally, it is the only subject area where teachers feel, and sometimes really do have, less skills than the students themselves. And that was the jumping off point. That last finding was the jumping off point for this teachers' digital literacy study. And if you can go to the next slide, actually, I think if you can go to the next, let's see, fourth slide, please. The one before that, sorry. Here. Yes. So basically, the jumping off point was to examine actually more in depth. But the background was that there is a lot of, how do you say, momentum happening in the region right now. The ASEAN Declaration on the Digital Transformation of Education Systems, the response of many countries in this region to, how do you say, roll out digital learning platforms because of COVID. The Bangkok Statement 2022, these are all things that are accelerators, actually, for improving learning outcomes and reaching out to traditionally marginalized children through digital technology. However, and there's a big however. So go on to the next slide, please. So we really wanted to understand better in these 5 countries how teachers gain their digital skills, which they can then pass on to their students, explore teachers' teaching methods, and actually also explore the comprehension of gender-responsive pedagogies in terms of digital skills acquisition. And this includes focusing on the online safety concerns that emerged from the previous study. Next slide, please. These are just the definitions. We generally consider digital literacy a broader term, and digital skills is a subset. That's a concise way of saying it. But here you have the definitions for reference when the PowerPoint is shared later. Next slide, please. So how did we do the research? Very quickly, we did an extensive desk review. Then we went into key informant interviews, focus group discussions. And as you can see, those second and third research methods were actually with a very small number. And so we enhanced those with actually digital polls deployed to teachers across the region. Next slide, please. This is just the distribution across the 5 countries. I'll just emphasize the countries again: Cambodia, China, Laos, Solomon, and Vanuatu. One of the things you'll notice here that these are a very diverse selection of countries. We basically reached out to our country offices and said who's interested in participating, who feels that there's a gap in information in their country on this topic. And we're actually quite pleased because the diversity actually shows the range of experiences that teachers have. And that I think is incredibly illuminating. Next slide, please. You can keep going until slide. Let's go to slide 13, country level findings. Yes. Okay, so what came out of these key informant interviews, these focus group discussions, and the polls? Really what happened was that a lot of positives actually did come out. Cambodia, for example, demonstrated that the teachers were really, really adaptable, especially during the COVID period. And some of the positives from China were that they really prioritize digital education, and they have initiatives and strategies and very high level policy buy-in. Other positives include Laos PDR's commitment to actually in using and leveraging digital technology for learning outcomes. And Solomon Islands and Vanuatu were 2 of the countries where you actually have gender actually, it's women are favored in terms of digital skills competencies development. But some of these negatives still exist, and that is, like in Cambodia, the gap between perceived and actual digital competencies is actually significant, therefore revealing deficiencies in preparedness. Teachers also report in countries like China that there are regional disparities despite what is reported at the national level. Or at least there are perceived regional disparities, right? In addition, in order to develop their competencies, they need to find the time to do that, and that actually is another challenge and constraint. Some of the other negatives include that Laos and Solomon and Vanuatu, they all face infrastructure limitations. And across all 5 countries, actually gaps remain in training, gender responsive pedagogies, online safety, infrastructure, and all of this meaning we really have to develop fit for purpose interventions, right? Context specific targeted interventions. Next slide, please. So we actually constructed the study around 3 areas, and the first one was actually about acquiring digital skills, the teacher's role, and the student impact. And some of the interesting things that came out of this were actually that, for example, teachers in China, they really emphasized national digital literacy with these advanced technologies, the VR, the virtual reality, the artificial intelligence, etc. And so they are embracing these technologies. That already shows like an inherent and intrinsic motivation to acquire these digital skills on the part of the teachers. In Cambodia and Vanuatu, there really lack structured professional development for digital skills, which means teachers who do want to or actually do develop their digital skills, they really have to kind of do it on their own, right? In Laos, despite this adaptability that was mentioned previously, there is still also limited formal training, but there are these individual government initiatives that are supporting, but it's targeting very small numbers. And it's about the resources available. It's not just about the opportunities or the courses, but it's actually about the actual training resources. And in Solomon, for example, not all teachers across the areas actually have access to those resources. So the 2 main issues are the varying levels of teacher digital proficiency and the resource disparities. And those combined actually weaken the teacher's ability to support students' learning experiences in general, but also specifically in digital skills development. And then next slide, please. The second area we were looking at, I'm sorry I'm speaking so quickly, but there's a lot here, so I'm just trying to go as quickly as possible. The second area we were looking at was pedagogies for digital skills and learning, the strategies and approaches. And so again, a wide variety of findings here and experiences by these countries. So a lot of the pedagogies in China, for example, they're really looking at more innovative methods, practicum based, like hands-on directed by these national frameworks, whereas countries like Cambodia and Vanuatu are reporting that they employed really basic resource constrained approaches to teachers' digital skills. And then, so that will skip that one, that was already mentioned. Some of the things that's going on in the Pacific Islands that I want to mention that I think is very interesting is they are working together broadly to actually develop a whole skills framework across all the Pacific Islands. And this is where digital skills is actually sitting, not just for the students, but also for the teachers. So they are at early stages, and they are, but they're also combining this with other skills that they have identified as necessary, including green skills, for example. And overall, what has really happened as a result of COVID-19 pandemic was actually accelerating the exploration of these different teaching methods. But in the end, the progress is varying because of limited professional development opportunities and also the distribution of resources. I also think, from my personal observation, this is not in the study, that there is a limited understanding of what are the most effective methods for actually teaching digital skills, despite the fact that, this is not an exceptionally new area of work. But there is, I think, a limited consensus, shall we say, about what actually works best. Okay, next slide, please. The third area we looked at was actually gender responsive pedagogies, online safety and inclusivity. And we mentioned before about the findings of the previous study about the gatekeeping of girls rather than boys, but also in terms of preferences. So in general, teachers reported across the 5 countries that they actually did not see any difference between girls and boys. But when there was a little bit more probing done, what was interesting was that certain things came out, and that included differences in confidence level, teachers observing actually that boys were more proactive or assertive in identifying opportunities to develop their skills, and girls were not. And that really changed at the adolescent level, right? And also, we found that there were actually some deeper biases existing in the perception. So when you ask why do you think the girls are less assertive or less interested, it was communicated that in general, the girls are just not interested, and they're not as good at technology as boys. So that did come out in a few places, despite the fact that if you ask directly, the teachers were like, no, girls and boys are the same. In Cambodia and Vanuatu, they actually said there were minimal gender differences reported in the digital skills acquisition among students. And in Solomon Islands, again, boys were perceived as more proactive and girls requiring more time to grasp the skills. So this is also reflecting and impacting how teachers are engaging, directly with the girls and boys to develop their skills in more, supportive and assertive ways. Okay, let's scroll through the policy recommendations so I can leave some time for questions and answers. The policy recommendations, I think, are fairly, not recreating, the moon or anything here, but these are things that we would like to stress are continuingly important and need to be more invested in. And I think I saw a comment in the chat window where somebody was talking about how teacher training is really important. And yes, that's really coming out of the teachers' digital literacy, that their confidence is low. And some of the teachers also feel threatened because they're expected to know all of this and how to teach also as well. But they're not given the professional development opportunities to develop it. The students know more than them, et cetera, et cetera. So really, it is important to establish these comprehensive training programs for digital skills acquisition. The teachers need to be leaders here, but have the support network there. And what does that mean? It means that you need to expand the digital resources, the digital teaching infrastructure, not just the training programs without the resources and infrastructure are just going to be a frustrating experience for all involved. You need to allocate the money for this professional development, and also not just the money, but the time. Oftentimes we're expecting the teachers to develop all of these skills, and then they have to do it on top of all the other duties they're doing. So also really understand the context of biases around technology, and how that varies from these countries to countries. We saw it does vary from country to country here in this study. So what are our approaches there? One of the suggestions could be, in terms of especially online safety, making sure that children, girls and boys, know how to keep themselves safe online, like we teach them how to be safe on the street. In the real world, we also teach them how to be safe in the online space. And that is also part of, raising the awareness and training the teachers and the parents themselves. And then I think you can go to the next slide. I already mentioned the time required for digital skills development. I cannot emphasize it enough. I think also language accessibility in digital resources. We know that everybody learns better in their native or their mother tongue. That includes teachers. Also, let us be innovative in how we create partnerships, and that is encourage these public-private. There is so, like Evan was saying, right? Yeah, that there are so many actors out there. How we can bring them together in a very strategic partnership to allocate these or raise these resources and then allocate them for the infrastructure and the resources that are missing in many of these places. And then really also promote that community involvement and awareness about, so that parents, communities, and teachers are part of that learning for the students. And it's not solely the method of self-learning or peer learning that, what's happening now with our student community. And of course, the standardizing the digital literacy education where possible. I think this study actually shows how difficult that is and how almost impossible that is because of the diversity of the needs. But I do think there are some standards that should be celebrated. And those are things like, what are the key competencies that we need? How do we prepare all of our student population, no matter what gender they are, what socioeconomic status they are, for a future that will involve digital skills, whether it's higher education or the labor market. And then finally, if you want to go down to the last slide, please. I just want to leave you with these 6 bullet points. I've mentioned it, but I want to emphasize this so this stays with your thinking. And that is, teachers are not sitting on their chairs and just, having a vacation. They see the need. They are telling us what they need, and we need to support them. They've already done so much, through the COVID pandemic, and after they've done so much, but we need to support them further. And that needs to be done to overcome the disparities that already exist. We cannot replicate the existing inequities between urban, rural, or whatever, that a lot of teachers and the children themselves actually face. We need to really focus on the comprehensive training programs, and they can't be ad hoc either, right? A little training here, a little training there. It really has to be sustained. We have to really look at in-service and pre-service training on this. We have to demystify online safety education, and how safe or unsafe the online sphere can be, and empower both teachers and their students on how to actually navigate those spaces safely. We should consider the teacher's request for equipped classrooms. Well, what does that mean, and what does that look like in each country? I really think it means that they have the tools and the training and the support from their head teacher, their regional education focal points, whatever, to actually continue to work with their students and raise the learning outcomes of their students in terms of the digital skills. And I think the last point really is about, we need to work together. So it's a call for action and a call for collaboration on ensuring the countries in this region, not just the ones in ASEAN, actually can digitally transform their education systems. And I will stop there. And I'm sorry I overtook my time, but I did want to hit some of those bullet points. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Antonia. Very comprehensive presentation and a lot to think about. There's been a lot of things coming in the chat. A lot of overlapping themes are about sort of teacher training and pedagogy, and we're wondering, do you have any good examples from the countries in this study of good practices in teacher training, or approaches that, I know it's hard to generalize, but just maybe some things that stand out to you from this research and from the from the data that you collected. You're muted. You have to unmute her.
you. Thank you. I couldn't unmute myself. So, well, I mean, maybe we take two examples from countries that are at different stages that have wildly different situations and contexts, right? So, Laos PDR has actually has been showing the commitment and the acknowledgement that teacher training needs to happen, and that the government actually, through one of the UNICEF supported work, which is why I know about it, the Campaña Lao Learning Passport, they actually did attach it to some minimal training, and the teachers actually responded really positively, but it's just not enough. It's not at the right level. It's not comprehensive enough. It's not, and basically the teachers filled that gap themselves. So that's when we talk about in the presentation, the remarkable adaptability of the teachers in Laos PDR. This is what we're really talking about. The government will is there. The government acknowledgement that this is important is there, and it's challenges in finding partners to actually do more structured and comprehensive training programs is where I need to stress that we can do that public-private partnership better to actually support their vision. And then, of course, a good practice is China. That's the other end of the spectrum. In China, the teachers are generally more digitally literate. And therefore, the students actually benefit from more interactive and engaging learning experiences. Some of the things that China have, they have these comprehensive digital strategy. I think that's online, you can see it. And from what I understand, but I can look this up more, there are also, what's the word? I've forgotten my English. Corollary training programs on this. Matching was what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to find the word for matching. But yeah, so you have these diverse experiences and examples. But I think one of the things here is that, I mean, there's the gap is also from standardizing. So remember that finding at the end where I was talking about standardizing teacher education approaches. What we really want to be encouraging is these countries to learn from each other, because there's no reason everybody needs to start from zero. Right?
Right. I think that's why we're all here and there's actually, speaking of that, there's a lot of really great things happening in the chat, people exchanging resources and asking questions. So I think we're going to have to move on to our next presentation, but Antonia, if you have a few more minutes, if you want to scroll through the chat, there's some questions that targeted specifically to your presentation that you might be able to make some connections with those if you're willing to communicate.
Oh, I think Amy is facing some technical issues. Is she back?
Oh, it's me?
Amy? Yeah.
It's me that's facing the technical
I can hear
issues.
you now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Antonia was frozen, so I thought it was her. I don't know what you heard last, but thank you, Antonia. It'd be great if you can continue the conversations in the chat with the time you have left. And I'd like to move on to our next presenters. Anna and Yun, it's all you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Amy. So are you showing our slides, Annika? Great. Thank you. You can flick through to the next slide, please. Anna and I are actually very excited to be here because we've been working on our research on technology and education in the Southeast Asia region for the last 4 years now. So today we're sharing our research in particular with a focus on Laos PDR. It was part of a case study that we both conducted for the GEM regional report on technology and education in Southeast Asia, which was published late last year. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. So as part of the case study, Anna and I interviewed 23 stakeholders in the Lao education sector across the school and tertiary subsectors, including policymakers, donors, system and school leaders, as well as implementation partners to look at what was effective at the classroom level. Next slide, please. What we found from our research across the Southeast Asia region during the COVID period was that meaningful digital adoption and transformation required 3 key things. And one of those was access to infrastructure, improvement in digital literacy of the population, as well as the socialisation and awareness of digital technology. And we recognise that every education system is at a different phase of their readiness to adopt and implement technology in their education system. So it's important to recognise that leveraging what works well and building on what already exists is important in effective implementation of technology integration. So like many countries in the Southeast Asia region, digital infrastructure expanded rapidly in Laos PDR with widespread mobile and internet coverage. So reports were that 92% of households had access to a mobile phone. However, as Anna will talk about later on, there are connectivity and affordability issues which pose the greatest barriers for access in the most rural and regional areas, and that affects the most marginalised students and their families. What we found in Laos, though, was that there was very strong political commitment to building a more digitally literate population to help improve economic growth and human development. So there was already that very strong political high-level commitment. And this was through the adoption of new laws and more robust regulatory frameworks that worked in the favour of the education system when it gets to integrating digital technology more fully. For marginalised groups, as we have found in other countries in the Southeast Asia region, low-tech modalities were actually quite successful in meeting the needs of marginalised groups, particularly for those who are the poorest in Laos PDR. Education broadcasting was used quite extensively during the COVID period to deliver lessons. And this was taking into account the low levels of internet penetration into the most remote regions in Laos. So content that was actually developed pre-COVID was expanded and used during the pandemic to support continuity of learning through YouTube videos and also offline, as well as the Campania Laos platform. Next slide, please. So what lessons have we learned so far from Laos and other low resource emerging education systems in the adoption of technology? And some of the evidence was that as I described before, low-tech modalities support student learning through the delivery of literacy content in the classroom, using offline as well as preloaded literacy content. It showed an increase in student engagement. It showed improved learning outcomes and reduced absenteeism. And these were reports from small-scale studies which need to be further researched, I think, in order to understand how those mechanisms could be scaled across the country. During the pandemic, teachers used text messaging to communicate with parents about their children's attendance and their learning progress, which improved the accountability for student learning between the school and the home. There were also opportunities to enhance teacher professional learning programs through the introduction of ICT and pedagogical approaches during COVID. Our research across Southeast Asia showed a very strong willingness of teachers to adopt new technology. However, this was dependent on the autonomy that was given to them to do so. In Laos PDR, the enabling environment provided a new curriculum and a focus on student-centred approaches with associated teacher development programs to provide teachers with formative assessment skills that might help them to assess the progress in their student learning through the use of technology, as well as other skills that can facilitate technology adoption in the classroom, such as play-based learning, collaborative techniques, and communication skills. And at the policy level, supporting the integration of technology into education and planning was also piloted by the Ministry of Education and Sports through their Sports Management Information System, LESMIS, which uses GIS-enabled data to aggregate information to support decision-making for education and planning across at the higher education level, as well as right down to the central, right down to the provincial levels. And I will pass on to the next slide, Anna.
Thanks, Yung. Antonia talked about this before, some of the unintended consequences of the EdTech rollout, and we looked at this in Laos, and we've seen this in many other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Our study in Laos demonstrated that a very large proportion of rural children were actually unable to access some of the technological interventions and innovations that were rolled out during the pandemic. So we saw things like mobile broadcasting, not only for learning, but for things like socio-emotional learning, social skills development, and as Yung mentioned, keeping kids in touch with teachers. But when we think about location in Laos PDR, rurality continues to be a huge barrier. We also can see different levels of access, and Antonia talked about this before as well, but thinking about digital skills and digital literacy, it's not just amongst students, it's also amongst teachers and sometimes amongst parents and caregivers as well. And so I'll talk a little bit more about disparate access in terms of professional learning opportunities, but location in Laos PDR is a major impediment. And it's not just because of infrastructure in many cases, it's also sometimes societal, cultural norms around accessing technology and the willingness to do so. Girls do face unequal access to technology and the opportunity to gain digital skills. Antonia was talking before about how in adolescence this accelerates, but we know when we drill down a little bit deeper that girls in particular, yes, are often precluded from participating in technology. Sometimes in the home, they're not given priority of devices or access to data, if that exists. But as they get older, sometimes there is more hesitation to actually engage girls in those spaces. When we actually look at ethnic minority groups of girls, we see that there are much lower digital literacy skills. And I think this is a really important point, that sometimes with investment and support, girls can do really well. But what types of girls we're talking about, that's a little bit more nuanced. Not all girls have the same opportunities. And certainly in many of the reports that are out there now, there is a suggestion that boys are doing worse in terms of digital literacy, but in terms of learning in many countries in the region. Again, when we start to think about the differences in those population groups and different types of girls, we get a very different story. Next slide. In terms of what we found from our case study as well, Antonia has touched on this. I feel like, sometimes it's difficult to come in as the third speaker, but it's good to see alignment between the research we're doing. There's not always consistency and coordination across Laos PDR. Sometimes technologically infrastructure, investments and regulatory environments look quite different in the regions. And so when we're thinking about scalability of technology, that can really undermine some of those practices. Again, confidence and capacity to use technology at a system level, that's also disparate. So when we think about the big systems that are in place to monitor student learning, to make sure that professional learning is administered, that technology is used to administer some of these systems, sometimes the confidence and capacity at the system level just isn't there. And certainly if you have system level actors that aren't confident to use some of those technologies, they won't necessarily be exploited. And that often plays out at the school level as well. We do think that training at the system and school level is needed in terms of enhancing technology, but we also see some real positive things happening in Laos, as Yung mentioned before. So with training, support and investment, lots can be done. Next slide. When we get down to the teacher level, it's a little bit more complex. So we've done multiple studies, as Yung mentioned, now looking at teacher capacity and readiness to actually engage with technology. But their understanding and capacity isn't the only reason that sometimes means that teachers don't use technology in the way that they could. We found in Laos that, yes, many teachers lack adequate digital skills. With the teacher shortages at the moment, one of the realities is that there is a large amount of teacher attrition in Laos PDR, as well as in other countries in the region. Teachers are leaving the profession globally, and sometimes, in many cases, retired teachers are coming back in to fill some of these gaps. We can see differences in terms of digital proficiency on the basis of age, as well as on the basis of qualifications. And we don't always have those arrangements or agreements where teachers can work with other teachers who might be less skilled in order to build their capacity. Not all teachers have access to the same professional learning opportunities. So again, in Laos PDR, we saw with the platforms that were being administered during the COVID pandemic, there were some excellent resources that were made available to some teachers. Not all teachers had equal access. Not all teachers use digital technology consistently across the country and across their classrooms either. So again, this isn't only about access, whether you're giving teachers devices, it's about how comfortable they feel to use them. It's about their capacity to work with colleagues to use them, but it's also about understanding what works best and for what types of students. And again, one of the biggest issues here is that we're seeing that in many cases, there are high-tech, mid-tech solutions that don't have no-tech adaptations that can be used. And so when we think about technology, and I saw many of the comments on the chat talking about rolling out devices, making sure that there are partnership programs, it isn't always achievable in a context like Laos. And that's not to say that technology can't be really impactful, but we really think that there needs to be adaptations on the basis of accessibility, on the basis of teacher readiness, and on the basis of teacher willingness to engage with technology as well. Next slide. Now, I'm a researcher, and I think this is an important question that we need to be asking. Does technology actually work for everyone? So the GEM report, regional report this year, was entitled Technology, a Tool on Whose Terms? And I think that this is a really important conversation to have in terms of what's driving education technology investment in the region and in Laos, and what we can do with it. At the beginning of the presentation, we were looking at the effectiveness of current educational technologies. So Evans, you were talking about the lack of evidence on education technologies at the moment. That is a big problem. We don't have a lot of evidence that technology actually works for all types of students. When we look at certain types of students, for example, with disabilities, we can see some promising practices in terms of technologies that can improve foundational literacy skills. We can see technologies are helpful for keeping kids connected during periods of crisis. And I saw some participants from Myanmar asking about this on the chat earlier. But we really have very little evidence on the quality of digital tools, the quality of pedagogies, and those that are being rolled out in Laos PDR, we have very, very small scale information on whether they work. So when we think about the impacts of digital technology on student learning, really we need much more research in this space, and perhaps more research before continued rollout and expansion. I think sometimes, we in the education sector will be dazzled by the next new product without asking some questions about the ways that it can be used. So technology can be very effective for certain types of students, and for others, it can not add much to their actual learning needs and learning experiences. And certainly, again, understanding the context and understanding potential for adaptation is a really good place to situate this conversation. We've got very poor evidence on how digital technology can be adapted to support students who have additional barriers. Again, we often talk about poverty, disability, location, rurality in Laos, and conflict is one that we see. So often there is the conversation about access and equity and the conversation about quality. So we saw during the pandemic that there was extended reach, that there was delivery, but we don't know much about the quality of programming and the quality of interventions that are being delivered. And this is certainly something that we need to keep looking at. We can get more information around technology and the role that it plays. And again, both Evans and Antonia talked about this, about student safety and well-being online. During the pandemic, again, we saw practices like teachers being able to text children in their class. Now, this is great in terms of continuing learning, but then we think also about teacher accountability and child safety. So there are definitely some practices that need to be examined carefully, and we need system support around what that looks like and how it can be rolled out. What we did see in Laos PDR, and we have seen in many countries we've researched, is that when technology is implemented, there is often very little planning that goes with it around child safety. And I know Antonia was before talking about teaching children to be safe online. And sometimes even in Australia, where I live, we don't have parental knowledge or understanding of what kids are doing online these days. And so being able to provide parental support as well as teacher training, and then again, you know, encouraging children to be responsible for being safe in online spaces should certainly be part of any initiative, not just the mental health ones that are out there at the moment. Next slide. So Young, would you like to take over again, or would you like me to do this?
Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted waiting to be unmuted. So hopefully from our presentation and the last two presentations, we can come up with some way forward based on the research findings in Laos PDR. So the short-term wins, I guess, is the message is around starting from what works well and where the country is at in its technology adoption and implementation process. So, for example, in Laos PDR, that's building on the Campania Laos platform. So in emerging systems and in low resource systems, we see that the development of content is important. So the Campania Laos platform is a smart way to be able to upload that content to be shared more broadly. What would be the next step for Laos to look at would be the further development of that platform. So it's more interactive, like a learning management platform that's more gender responsive and targeted at the minority students who are marginalised and excluded from the learning in the use of EdTech in learning. Long-term goals, I think what we've learned from the Laos case study is that teachers are actually willing to learn and adopt technology if given the right autonomy and support mechanisms in place. So for an example, in one of our programs, we supported teacher educators by introducing the Moodle platform. And once we did that, and that was supported by evidence and theory around student-centered learning approaches and self-regulation to help them facilitate online learning, they took off and did that on their own and created their own peer-to-peer learning networks through Moodle. So I think there's a lot to be said for including teachers in development of their own content that's going to be targeted at the learning needs of students. And as Anna touched on briefly, there needs to be a lot more research into what works in education and technology. A lot of the programs that we investigated were small scale, they weren't replicated. So it would be great to be able to have a look at some of the programs that would have a longitudinal effect, and those that can actually work best in different contexts, supporting those who are probably the most, face the most difficulties in accessing education and technology. Okay, so that comes to the end of our presentation. I will open up for
Thank you so much.
questions.
We have a lot, we have a lot of questions in the chat, and I think some of them you've answered and through your presentation actually, just happened to very well planned. And then some of them I propose that we collect some of these questions and move on to our last presenter so we don't run out of time, and then open it to present. I think my connection is unstable again. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay. So I'd like to move to the next presentation, and then we'll collect the questions for all the panelists to answer at the end, if that's okay. And Young and Anna, thank you so much for this very clear and comprehensive presentation. And I think there are some direct questions that you may be able to also address in the chat when you have a moment. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to Tuet. last but definitely not least, I'll hand it over to you to tell us all about digital equity, inclusion, and accessibility in Vietnam. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here to learn from and share knowledge in our network about different efforts in different countries in supporting the digital innovation in education. So my name is Tweet. I'm the Digital Education Officer in the UNICEF Vietnam Country Office. And today I would like to share with you some of our effort in promoting digital equality, inclusion, accessibility in Vietnam education system. So I will go through next slide, please. So the structure, I will first highlight the UNICEF Child Center Digital Equality Framework, and then I will go to quickly through the context of Vietnam, our UNICEF Vietnam education program. Then I will highlight some of the initiatives that we have been piloting in the last 3 years, and lesson learned from both our successes and failures in those initiatives and the way forward. Next, please. So first of all, I'd like to share with you the Child Center Digital Equality Framework that our Office of Global Insight and Policy published last year. The Office of Global Insight and Policy is our internal think tank to support with identify emerging issues and practices in digital transformation in general, in transformation of education system, including the digital transformation. And this framework that give us highlight some of the aspects for consideration to ensure policies and practice that sufficiently robust for an equitable digital future that will incorporate all of these aspects. So firstly, it's about access. Ubiquity here means available everywhere. So it's emphasized the accessibility of infrastructure, devices, connectivity, and also the platform and content to make sure that children everywhere can access the resource anytime they need. The second aspect is the digital literacy. So digital literacy and skills will continue to be a focus on the policies and related practice regarding digital transformation and skills. However, there's a need to emphasize on the transferable skills as well, like how we support the children through the digital tools for improving the collaboration in the classroom, how to learn about online etiquette, about media literacy, how to think critically about the content that they interact every day, how to and more awareness about data privacy. And then another aspect is like how the children engage with the digital content, whether they're just passive consumers of the content or they also, children also actively join in the co-creation process of the content, and whether they understand the impact of the content that they're creating on others. Anna's and also Antonia also mentioned about the highlight earlier in their presentation about like motivation and attitude, cultural norms of the important actors in the lives around the children, digital engagement. So that's an important aspect to consider there as well in our policy and the design of initiatives. And then there need performance indicators, very clear on how that impact the outcomes on different aspects on the life of our children, like how that help improve the education, well-being, safety, the empowerment, self-development, helping children to raise their voice, improve their living condition, health and nutrition. And then there's need to consider the socio-economics, cultural resources at home, demonstrate like understanding and how to address the inequality in terms of gender identity, ethnicity in the context of the children, or the inequality in the funding for school and facilities in the neighborhood. So this framework gives us a general guidance for all the aspects that we should consider in designing addressing in policy and designing our initiatives. Next, please. So I'm gonna go into the context of Vietnam and highlight our program. So in the context of Vietnam, we have the population of 99 million people, with 5 million still poor. We have 54 ethnic groups, but the majority is Kinh and Hoa, that 85%. And we have 53 other ethnic groups with smaller number. But the poverty rate of the Kinh almost near zero, but 27% of poverty for other ethnic groups. And that reflects in other aspects of the socioeconomics and the living condition and the learning outcomes of the children as well. So there's a lot of information on this slide, and I'm sorry that is a bit out alignment, but I just want to highlight some of the key data here that for early childhood education enrollment, the majority for the Kinh ethnic group is 99%, but for the Khmer group is only 66%. 42% of children do not complete upper secondary school. And there's a difference between ethnic group, like 80% of Kinh majority completed secondary school, but only 37.8% of Khmer ethnic minority completed secondary school. And in the key information in the center here, you see that for related to digital skills, 93% of teachers in the remote area did not use technology pre-COVID. And 6 in 10 girls and boys 15 to 24 years old in our country has no basic ICT skills. And in terms of infrastructure, even though we have 70% connected to the internet, 12,000, more than 12,000 schools still not have internet access. So next, please. So in the next slide, you see the a very clear inequality among between urban and rural and among ethnic groups regarding the ICT skills for young people aged 15 to 24 in our country. So the children and adolescents in the urban area has double the amount of children in rural has digital skills, and children from the richest group 7 times more digital literacy than in the poorest group. And the Kinh Hoa with 44%, but the Hmong ethnic or the Khmer is only 1 to 11 or 19%. Next slide, please. So in our education program, we have different pillars addressing different aspects in the education system. So our focus is to support children and adolescents have equitable access to learning and benefit from opportunity to participate in clean, green, and safe environment. So we have 4 main output that we want to achieve. First is on the key, the skills area. Second, focus on the enabling environment, safe learning environment for the children, respect diversity, promote mental health, and enable civic engagement. The third pillar is on system policy, planning, monitoring, and financing, how we strengthen that aspect. And because the majority of a lot of big population of our children affected a lot by climate change, so we also have a pillar on how we adopt innovative, sustainable, climate smart solution and empower children for active engagement on climate action. Next, please. So with digital transformation, that cross-cutting on the 4 pillars that I've just presented to you, and our key aim for EdTech and innovation is to support the digital transformation to ensure every child has access to affordable, gender-responsive, and inclusive opportunities for learning and development in Vietnam, and how we look into how we can improve the learning outcomes, improve equity and inclusion for children with disability, ethnic children, for both boys and girls, and children affected by climate Next, please. So we have been working in different areas, and here this slide highlight some of the initiative. I'm not gonna go deep into this area of work, but we are working, like we have support the ministry in developing a digital competency framework for students. We are supporting the teachers department in building digital competency framework for teachers. We're also supporting the ICT department of ministry to looking into enhancing education management information system, especially in how we can collect data around marginalized children and support them better. And one pilot we have in the pipeline coming up is improving connectivity and skills for students in the least connected district, with 60% of school not connected to the internet. I'm not going in deep in this area, but next I'm gonna highlight some of the initiative that we have done in the last 3 years. You will receive the slide, so I'm just gonna go briefly through each initiatives and then summarize the key learning from the initiatives we have. So the first one, we have the free digital library that we collaborated with Global Digital Library from Norway. It's an open source digital public goods. And with local partner, we involved the Vietnam Institution of Educational Science. So we have developed the books and audio books. We also developed new books that featuring ethnic minority children and children with disability as main characters. And we adapt and translate those books into 8 underserved ethnic minority languages. Underserved here mean the ethnic group that still lack of quality early reading materials. And next, we are working on, we have piloted computational thinking. Sorry, for this slide, you see some of the pictures of the free digital library when we did the user test in Lào Cai and Sóc Trăng. Next, please. For computational thinking, we have collaborated with the National College of Education and Jew startup from Singapore, and we piloted in 4 schools with 120 children with online and offline game to support the children in the 4 area of abstraction, decomposition, algorithmic thinking, and logical thinking. Next. And we also piloting the virtual reality games for children with attention deficit hyper disorder. We collaborate with Therapeutics and National Center for Special Education. We co-create the game, 5 game models and build a desktop app to track the performance of the children. Next. And we have piloted the AVR and gamify STEM learning in collaboration with the Center for Family Health and Community Development in Vietnam, using the platform of EON. We co-create the content with teachers, with teachers also from ethnic groups. And so what have we learned on of that initiative that we've been piloting? I would like to share with you in the next slide, please. So yeah, what we've learned from both the success and failures of on the initiative, that we need to have a multi-stakeholder approach, the engagement of teachers, students, parents, technologists, linguists in the case of digital library, and different organizations in the approach to support the student. But we have learned that we need to be very clear at the beginning and understand well the cost of ownership and the business model of the edtech solution that we are building or we partnership with. The cost of ownership here means like who own the software, who own the data, and what does it cost for building and maintaining the software and the products, and how much that gonna cost, the implication of cost on the teachers, the school, the parents in the future for scalability. I mean, this we have learned that we need to have all of this information in advance before we designing the pilot, because we have learned a lesson with the computational thinking when we piloted and partner with the edtech startup from Singapore, is that after 1 year, they failed to secure the funding to develop their company. So then we didn't have the solution at the end. We didn't have the solution and software at the end. So it's really had the implication on the next round of the pilot. Then what we have learned is that the solution needs to be inclusive and safe by design. But that means we need to have a very clear guideline and standard at the beginning about like different accessibility features of the solution and how to make it like really accessible for different groups. What are the language adaptation? What are the features? Like it need to have the feature of being able to zoom in the text, for example, for children with visual impairment, or it need to be compatible with the text-to-speech software. And safe by design, then what are the requirements for the data, where the data should be kept, what are the data that the platform collect? Does it have data on the personal information of the teacher, the student, and how we anonymize those data? And it has to be an iterative process of continuous testing and involve the users, the teachers, and the student in the process of testing and refining. We shouldn't wait until the end to have a final product and disseminate that without going through the whole iterative process of continued testing and getting instant feedback. We also learned that on those considerations about gender identity, ethnicity, inequality in the socio-economic resources, the deeper understanding about that local context and the inequality will help us design the initiatives better, and especially in terms of accessible, need to have the accessible ad platform and content. Accessible content is not enough if it's posted on non-accessible platform, especially for children with disability. And if we as previous speakers already mentioned before, if we deploy the program to an area that really lack of infrastructure, then it needs to come with the solution to help improve access to connectivity and devices. And then if we provide devices to a place that already have connectivity, but the more device we bring into we also had to the plan to upgrade the connectivity or to optimize the connectivity to make sure that it can accommodate on the devices. And yeah, last but not least, that previous speakers already mentioned, and we also see the gap in our implementation, is to have very clear process and evaluation process of the design and the implementation of initiatives and those digital projects and tools to see how it affects the impact on the learning outcomes for students, how it supports the teachers in developing their capacity, how it supports them to reduce the workload and integrate the technology and pedagogy into their daily teaching, not adding an extra layers of administrative work for them. And also like how it support the children build digital literacy and transferable skills, not just digital skills. So yeah, that's what we have learned from all our initiatives. And it's not a perfect science. We still keep learning from the failures of our initiatives and identify the good best practices, and very keen to learn from other countries and other speakers and participants of the event today to continuously improve our process and effort to support the children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tuet. We don't have much time for questions, but I would love to put one out there for our presenters before we conclude, if that's okay with everyone. There's been a lot of conversations in the chat. A lot of questions I think have been answered and discussions are flowing. So that's great. And I hope a lot of your questions have been answered. But one theme that's come up, and I think a lot of people are curious, is related to
I think Arushi, do you want to jump in and ask?
in challenges for the government
Amy.
to engage with private sector. Yeah.
Amy, we
Frozen.
lost you for a second. Could you please repeat the entire question?
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on here. What are some opportunities and challenges for the government to engage with private sector partners to improve access and quality of technology use in schools? So in a nutshell, what comes to your mind in terms of what governments can do to engage with other partners? That's to anyone who wants to take it. Or avoid it. Yun, did you want to?
I was going to say I can jump in. I was going to say I think we need to tread this partnership carefully. While there is a role for the private sector, I think there needs to be a very strong regulatory framework in place. I have heard of the private sector wanting to take over EMIS. I'm not sure that's a good idea. It's a public good. So I think there needs to be a very strong regulatory framework in place before we think about those partnerships. But on the flip side, over COVID, our research has shown that there has been very successful and effective partnerships with the private sector in terms of providing free access to the internet for teachers and students to download data. It may not have worked well in all cases, but where it did work well, it was an effective mechanism to make learning more accessible.
Thank you. Tuet, do you have any thoughts on that? I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah, I agree with Young that we really need a strong role of the ministry and the government in place in terms of providing guidance and regulatory framework for partnering with private sector and edtech in supporting the education, digital transformation in education, especially in order for it to reach the most marginalized children, because it would need a strong guidance and a framework. But at the same time, I think the trend is when a private sector partner come in, they try to lock in their solution or data in their own ecosystem. But if we want that to reach the most marginalized children, it needs to be open source, it needs to be low cost. So that need a system in place that different partner can contribute in, and all of that data system need to interact and inform the general EMIS system that we have, rather than it locking into different edtech companies, edtech solution, and that really hard to incorporate later on.
Can I?
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, on this, I really agree with the other colleagues. I would go a step further in terms of having a platform for for engagement with the private sector, in terms of like when they are designing solutions, it should be a co-creation process, as we said, because it has to match the education goals. and it has to be addressing a specific bottlenecks that we might find within the education sector. So I think it's very important that it starts with the private sector, so this conversation can really be there, and also making sure that there is a common understanding of the evidence behind the solution that's being proposed, and that's really addressing an education goal. I think that's very important beyond the role of really regulating, but also really making it's a real partnership where there is a clear discussion and exchange between the government and the private sector actors.
Great. Thank you so much for responding to that question and for engaging in the chat. I think I'll move to close our session as we're a couple of minutes over. I want to extend so many thanks to our wonderful speakers and team members for making this event possible. There are so many really great questions and so much engagement. I want to thank all of the people who attended from all of our countries in the hub and beyond. And as you've seen in the chat, the webinar recording will be made available, and on our website, you'll also receive a post-event survey. We'd love for you to complete that and let us know what you liked about today's event and what you would like to see more of. And although our webinar is finished for today, our hub work will continue. So in the coming weeks, we do have a couple other events to put on your radar. On March 21st, a workshop on cross-national dashboards for accountability for gender equality in education. And on March 27th, webinar 19 on advancing gender equity and social inclusion, evidence-based education research in South Asia, Middle East, and North Africa. So please look out for those registrations through our news channels and alerts. Thank you again for joining us today, and I wish you well for the rest of the day.